Hey, howdy, and good afternoon, good evening, Aggies. David Cheney from the Group 1 Foundation's Public Service. It's going to be with Ray, Kevin, Stephanie, and myself. We chose the topic of the mental health implications of marijuana legalization and decriminalization. So basically, what the purpose of this study is to examine the marijuana use and its impact on mental health in the states where it's been legalized. So our project focused on examining data that we found available to determine if there is a noticeable impact to the psychological disorders or mental health in general that correlate with the use of legalized or even medical marijuana. The case study primarily focuses on the states who have legalized marijuana over the last several years since they've had the longest established data. So, for our bias, a few of us believe that states who've legalized marijuana for medical or recreational use have negatively impacted the mental health community of which they've been legalized. Also, we believe that it's increased, especially when focused on your schizophrenia, your paranoia, your bipolar, and psychotic episodes. Also, three of the four of us are actually police officers, so we went in this actually with a pretty open mind to see what we would find out and if our opinions might or might not change. So the primary audience for this report is going to be for policymakers who may be faced with the legalization and or decriminalization of marijuana in their jurisdictions. A secondary audience is the public health and medical communities in these jurisdictions. So to begin, starting in June 1971, that's when former U.S. President Nixon officially declared that drug abuse was, quote, public enemy number one. He wanted to take it upon himself to start a war on drugs before it was even considered or being called a war on drugs. So under these new policies and legislation, cannabis, or more commonly referred to as weed or marijuana, was labeled as a federally prohibited controlled substance. Basically put it on par with your opiates, your heroines, your LSD. However, marijuana has been praised for its medical benefits over the years and demonized for its abuse, and it's also the most used illicit drug in the United States. Yet the proponents of marijuana cite the drug's medical benefits as a reason for its use. So here you can see the map where in 1939 where marijuana was made illegal basically all across the United States. So now let's get the history of marijuana usage. Starting the first documented or known cases was in about 2700 BC. The Chinese used it for medicinal purposes to treat rheumatism, gout, malaria, and what they called absent-mindedness, which in today's terms, a form of mental health. About the year in the 1500s, marijuana found its way to the New World in the form of hemp, which was primarily used for shipbuilding. That's the strands of the plant itself. It was extremely strong, so it was great for building ships and the sails and whatnot. But up until 1970, the federal government recognized that cannabis did have a medicinal purpose. However, though, in 1970, marijuana was classified as a Scheduled I drug. Marijuana has remained a zero-tolerance drug through the 1990s. But what's decriminalization? So decriminalization is different from legalization. Decriminalization is basically just lessening the fines for possession and usage. Oregon was the first state back in 1973. They just made it simply a $100 fine for possession up to an ounce. So fast forward now, and let's go back to our civics class and remember the 10th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. It says the power is not delegated to the U.S. by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, or reserved to the states respectively or to the people. So using that 10th Amendment, states started legalizing and decriminalizing marijuana all across the country. That was their basis for the legalization, that states' rights, they had that right to do that. So in 1996, California became the first state to legalize marijuana usage. That stayed the main case up until 2012. In that year, Colorado became the first of 2 states to legalize the recreational use. And that was through an actual ballot initiative of the people. They voted to legalize it. Also, Washington voted to legalize it at the same time. So that's about 8 years ago. Since then, the dominoes have started falling. 2016, California approved the legalization of recreational use. Vermont, interesting enough, became the first state to legalize it through their state legislature, as opposed to making it a ballot initiative. That was just 2 years ago. But these states that have legalized it, they still face some risk from the federal governments because, the federal governments still consider it a felony for marijuana. So some of these states, some of these businesses that have sprung up and the dispensaries and whatnot in the states that have legalized it could still face federal charges at some point. They risk, every day they're open, they risk being raided by the feds, but for the most part, the feds are leaving them alone. However, most of these dispensaries are having to do a cash business, as most of the dispensaries cannot have bank accounts because the major financial institutions won't do business with them at the risk of having their accounts frozen. So, for medical marijuana for the mental health treatment. To date, the FDA has not approved a marketing application for cannabis for the treatment of any disease or condition. That's as of 2020. However, the FDA has approved 4 cannabis-related drugs for medicinal use. One derivative is that it's a use for the treatment of seizures, and then 3 synthetic-related products for the treatment of nausea that's associated with chemotherapy and AIDS. Currently, of the 50 states, 33 and the District of Columbia allow for the use of medical marijuana. Many states preemptively approved the medicinal use of cannabinoids for specific diagnosis without waiting for the rigorous studies or medical evidence to approve their efficiency. So for states that do just have medical marijuana, what are some of the things that you can get it prescribed for? Well, you got PTSD, anxiety disorders, depression, ADHD, bipolar, chronic pain, insomnia, opiate dependence, and then schizophrenia. According to the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine, several states allow for the usage of medical marijuana for any condition that the patient experiences relief. So you could walk into the doctor and say, your eye hurts or, your finger hurts, and they got to prescribe you marijuana. However, mental health disorders are one of the most common reasons that patients will seek medical marijuana. So one of the primary things that people self-medicate themselves with marijuana is for PTSD. However, most of the literature that we found is anecdotal, but a Washington State study has indicated that's effective in reducing symptoms by about 50%. Patients were self-reporting as having PTSD, however, through a usage app when no diagnosis was even necessary, and only short-term symptoms were changed. No long-term effect to the symptoms have been found with that study or other studies. Anxiety. The National Academy of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine report only one study was limited to 24 patients, and then marijuana is only effective for short-term symptom relief with no long-term relief. The continued short-term relief is affected by tolerance requiring higher and higher doses, which then could cause THC addiction, with THC being the substance in marijuana that provides the high. So for schizophrenia treatment, no state has expressly authorized marijuana for schizophrenia treatment. However, it may be prescribed in several states if it helps the patient improve. Studies are limited. One study that had a higher rate of bias did show promising effects when compared with the antipsychotic. However, the National Academy of Sciences noted that further research is still necessary. So with the use of recreational cannabis or marijuana across the U.S., it's showing evidence of a small number of users becoming addicted and psychosis. And over the years, the cultivation of THC has gotten stronger and stronger. For example, in 1980, average marijuana cigarette only had 2% THC. Today it's up to 13.6% THC. Well, this was as of 2012, rather, I'm sorry. So adolescent cannabis use and mental health. High cannabis use during adolescence may exacerbate a predisposition towards schizophrenia, we found. A Swedish study showed that adolescents who used cannabis on more than 50 occasions were nearly 7 times more likely to develop schizophrenia. Other uses with adolescent use include memory deficiency, attention span reduction, reduced speed processing, abnormal social behavior, mood and anxiety disorders, and a greater chance of dependence. Again, this was from 2012. Marijuana edibles. A lot of the states that have legalized it, they've got a burgeoning market of edibles of marijuana. You got people that don't want to smoke it, so they just do edibles, but they pose a risk to younger recreational and novice users due to the increased potency. You may get a chocolate bar with THC in it, and somebody will unknowingly eat the entire chocolate bar when they only need a small square of it instead of eating the whole thing, and all of a sudden they've just not necessarily overdosed, but they've taken a huge amount of marijuana. They're marketing in the packaging, enticing the children and younger users, and then edibles are metabolized differently than smoked marijuana. So our conclusion is, the bottom line is more studies are needed to determine one way or another how marijuana affects our brain and mental development. But the bottom line is, until the federal government decides to remove it from a Schedule I classification, the results are going to be rather biased and limited and one-sided. Properly funded scientific studies need to be implemented and allowed. The popularity of recreational use does not appear to be losing steam. Something must give if we're going to be able to find more concrete evidence on how it affects humans and its true medicinal value. And then we've got all our sources here. So thank you all for listening and for watching. If this is the end of your Aggie career, congratulations. If not, good luck the rest of your term. Good night.